Welcome to Murder Most Foul, a podcast devoted to exploring famous murder cases of our time. Some solved, some unsolved, but all fascinating and guaranteed to raise the hairs on the back of your neck. I'm your host, Jim Solanowski. Today's episode: Face to Face with Whitey Bulger. The FBI's high-stakes capture of fugitive Boston mob boss James Whitey Bulger at his hideout in Santa Monica, California, slammed shut a 16-year-long international odyssey to find one of the FBI's most wanted men. But it was not the end of the story. FBI Special Agent Richard Teahan, who commanded the Whitey Bulger Task Force, brings us face to face with Whitey during an epic 6-hour transcontinental debrief on board a Justice Department jet as it returned Bulger to Boston. Teahan details the only interview Bulger ever granted to law enforcement, revealing his ruthless and often paranoid worldview. Chronicling his personal quest to confront Bulger, Teahan lifts the veil on the backbreaking, sometimes anguishing effort to bring one of America's most brutal organized crime bosses to justice. And he joins us today on Murder Most Foul. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Murder Most Foul. My guest today is Rich Teahan, who has written a fabulous book along with Bob Ward, and we'll explain how the two of them get together to do this book. But it's the book is called Face to Face with Whitey Bulger, and it's an FBI agent's account of capturing and debriefing Boston's most notorious gangster. And I can tell you right now that Rich is the FBI guy. Bob Ward is the journalist, and it's a brilliantly written book, so I'm not going to say who's got the credit for the actual words in it, but the story is all Rich's. So welcome, Rich.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. So
I met you and Bob Ward at a Barnes & Noble where you're having a book signing, and I have to point out, a lot of my public doesn't know where I'm from, but I'm from beautiful downtown Providence. Well, not actually. It's actually beautiful downtown Cranston. Okay. Well, same thing. People don't know where Cranston is. So
I knew Cranston well.
This case, which is Whitey Bulger, is infamous across the world. And you know, I knew it long before I was here. But everyone that I talked to across the country, friends, and everyone knows who Whitey is. If not for the story, the documentaries, the movies, 2 or 3, I'm losing track of how many Hollywood movies, not just, little independents, big Hollywood movies that were made about Whitey or something about Whitey Bulger and the Winter Hill Gang. Also coming from Providence, I've been here about 30 years. There is a big connection between the mob, and maybe it's a little less, big connection between the Boston mob and the Rhode Island mob. We have Federal Hill, and there's an old story. When you go to the restaurants on Federal Hill, don't sit with your back to the door. So, given that, as I say, this is a specific, there is so much out there, and I went back to Wikipedia I thought I'd get a thumbnail. It's 27 pages. And not, minuscule details. It's like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Thankfully, as it comes out, I want you to be freewheeling. Anything you want to say, please don't. I'll ask questions if I feel we're coming to an end of a story. But I think everyone knows a lot. We want to fill some of it in. I don't want people to, part of the problem is that we have romanticized the mob. And that's just, Hollywood likes to do that. But if you go through those 27 pages, the pain, suffering, murder, and I will cover one case, the Deborah, what was her last name?
Davis.
Her
demise. And that just it encapsulates the whole thing, the heartlessness. And again, we can't in 10 hours, they've been doing this for a long time, try to figure out why he or any mobsters that do that, not kill to make money or kill to stay out of prison, but a lot of it is just vicious violence, and we'll get into some of that. But the best part of this that makes this story, and that's why I've been chasing Rich for a while now, is that he was in on the final capture, and we'll talk about how long Whitey was out there after his horrible career, but he was on the lam for a long time. And a lot of people will talk of some of that, America's Most Wanted and all in the German show and all this stuff where all across the world, they were trying to find him. And eventually he is found in California, and you go out there with other support staff, but you're out there, you pick him up and you actually fly with him in an airplane for how long that takes. It was a jet, so how long it takes from California back to Boston, and you debriefed him. And that's all in the book. And what I point out to people whenever I do one of these, we are not going to get near scratching the surface of this book. So as well written as it is, it's got dialogue, it's got exchanges between you, go on for pages and pages as you're asking him questions, he's being a wise ass in his answers and so forth, and you keep your cool and get what you need to get. But the only way to really appreciate this book is to get it. So again, as we said, Barnes & Noble has it because you and Bob have been doing sign-ins all this summer long on the weekends, which is great. And but if you like Amazon, or you get it at your local library. I always say I don't mind Barnes & Noble, but maybe a smaller bookstore. It might take them a week to get it for you, but you're supporting a local business. So I'll get off my soapbox. I always like to just say that. Sure. So we're going to start so people get a little bit to know about you. You sort of have life before Whitey, right, life after Whitey, and we again, it's in the book. We want to cover a couple of things. We go back to your dad, who was in the law enforcement, but rather than you went to this Catholic school and then you went that's that you can get that also off of Wikipedia. But I love to pick up well, again, you said you're working. What are you? You're not. Are you still with the FBI in some fashion or not?
I am not. No, I work for a sheriff's department as an internal affairs investigator in northern Massachusetts.
Cool. Well, I know Norton as well. Alabama.
Northern Mass.
Oh, northern Mass is not exactly well. Okay. Yeah. No, I thought it was Norton. I know Norton up there too. So, you eventually, again, your dad was in, and there's great pictures in the book, by the way. And there's a picture of your dad arresting or being part of the arresting party of the Boston Strangler.
Yeah.
So you came from great stock. And there's also a story where you were in I guess Howard Johnson's with your dad. I didn't, some of this I read quickly, didn't go back. How old were you when?
I was probably 7 or 8, 9 years old.
And your dad, for some reason, is pointing out, oh, you see that guy over there? That's Whitey Bulger. Yeah. And I'm sure you went, oh, wow, Dad, where's my hamburger? Yeah. So why don't you tell a little bit about obviously your dad, or he was an influence, all our dads were, mine was, for you to decide to go into, so obviously you looked into joining the authorities and land ultimately in FBI. But take us a little bit into, how you came to decide this is what your career is, serving the public.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Quincy, Massachusetts, and my father was a state trooper for probably 25 years, retiring somewhere around 1977. He rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel, and my mom worked for the State Lottery Commission. And so, I was close with my father, and I always looked up to him, and he had such a great career, and I would always hear the stories with he and his friends, telling war stories. And I that kind of rubbed off on me. And my uncle was also a state trooper. And then my brother was an FBI agent as well. And my oldest son, Connor, is a Boston policeman currently. So it runs in the family for sure.
In the blood. It's in the blood.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've just got a lot of friends that, that are in law enforcement and made a lot of contacts over the years. But really, I went to college at Suffolk University, and I was originally going to be a lawyer. And then I started being interested in the FBI because my brother was, in the FBI, and so I applied, and it took me a long time to get in. It took me approximately 2 years to get in, but I thought it was the pinnacle of doing, a lot of great things. And I didn't know it at the time, but I wanted to be an FBI agent. It was a really cool job. I could go do a myriad of different kinds of cases, and I was interested in being an investigator. And so finally I got the call in Thanksgiving of 1991, and literally I was at the gym in Braintree, and my father called the gym and said, "Hey, can you go over the intercom and get my son to take a phone call?" And so so over the intercom, everybody's looking at me, and I go up to the front desk, and the attendant is like, "You get a call from your dad." And so I get on the call, and he's like, "Rich, you got to pack a bag and be in Quantico on Sunday." And this was a Thursday, and or a Friday. I'm sorry, it was right after Thanksgiving. And so I packed a bag. I went home. I told my wife Ellen. We were married in 1990, so we weren't married that long. And she was shocked. She's like, "You're leaving for 18 weeks?" And I said, "Yeah." And I couldn't turn it down. And so, I went off in December of 91 and went through 18 weeks of training by myself, with other classmates and it was intimidating. I had never been through an academy type setting. I wasn't in the military. I was a college graduate, and so I was surrounded by lawyers and accountants and the former police and, people that had done that had been through that process before. And it was intimidating. It really was. But I was determined to get through it. And, I had a great career.
Now, again, that needs to get us to where we are. But I do want to add one thing to it's a great story in the book, and I want to hear it from your lips. We all have a kind of a concept of that I watch too many cop shows, and I'm into the British ones, watching the British streaming ones, Vera and Prime Suspect and all that stuff. So no, confident. Confident and everything's good.
Yeah.
But tell the story of Mean Joe Green.
Oh,
He's not the football player.
No, he was labeled Mean Joe Green, as a comparison, but he was a very legendary detective in New Haven, and he and I partnered up, and I learned how to be a street cop with him and talk to people. I had never really worked in the inner city, and he knew that. Like, he knew I was very green, and I was a white kid from Quincy, and so he showed me the ropes, and he was feared in New Haven, Connecticut, feared. And he had been a homicide detective, and then he came over to the Fugitive Task Force with us, and I was partnered up with him for a long time. And he just taught me the ropes and taught me how to speak to people and get information from people. And I considered him such a valuable resource to learn, how inner cities work and how you operate in inner cities. And New Haven was a very small city. At the time I was working there, it was probably maybe 130,000 people, 140,000 people, with Yale right in the center of it. But all of the neighborhoods around it were rough, and a lot of drugs and a lot of gangs, and a lot of violence. And Joe just showed me the ropes. He showed me how to handle myself in the streets. And he was he was beloved by everybody in my group. And
In one of the sections where you're talking about him, I don't know if this is the first time, or it sounded like it was very early on where you drew your gun. And that was with him. You want to tell a little bit about that?
Sure. I forget the backstory behind what he was wanted for, but he ran from us, and he was a big African-American kid, and he ran from us, and Joe was driving. And so I hopped out because I was the fast one. I was in shape and I was fast. And so I had chased the guy into a house, and it was dark, and I chased him down a hallway, and I drew my gun just out of my training, and I was nervous because it was just me, and it was dark, and I can't remember. I don't think I had a flashlight, and so I'm like, freeze, freeze, freeze. And Joe comes sauntering down. He's like, hey, 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 like, calm down. We're all good here, And I'm like, Joe, it was just me and him. Don't worry about it. Just chill out. And they knew each other, the bad guy and Joe. And go figure. So he takes me after. He's like, Teahan, you gotta just talk to these guys. They don't want, they don't want a gun drawn at them. If you can talk to them and get them to comply, but if they take an action against you, of course. But he was just trying to hide. And I was like, freeze,
the part in there too is, of course, because the guy knew knew Joe. He's like yelling at Joe. It's like, why did you let this guy was going to kill me? It's like, please protect me from this crazy cop here, this crazy FBI guy.
Yeah, I was brand new, and
you're a newbie.
Oh yeah, and it was very early on, and I was still learning, and when you're chasing somebody, your adrenaline goes up, and you get when you're boxed in and you're in a dark hallway, bad things can happen, and that's why I my adrenaline just spiked, and but it's funny, as time went by, that went away, and I could just talk to these people, and trust me, we would get into plenty of fights, and people didn't want to try and de-escalate through verbal. They just wanted to fight. And I learned the distinction between when I could talk somebody down and when I couldn't. And that's what Joe taught me. So it was pretty cool, but it was racking in the beginning.
Well, and it's clearly why you're still talking to me today. That I'm sure there were some that were close and maybe were shot at, but clearly more times than not, you got the right note going and didn't have to escalate, at least not to the point where you were shot. Now, so again, like I said, your career is great, and I don't know if you're planning a book about your whole career, but this one is so engaging and riveting that you could leave now and say, boy, I've really done this. I mean, as far as literary work. But so we have this, which is what you just talked about, your career, which went on. You can even say maybe at what point during your career did sort of you go sideways into Whitey. We'll talk about that in a minute. But give my audience who might know a little bit, they know the name or they know a movie. They know the mobsters. They know Corleone and all that and stuff from New York. Boston had the Winter Hill Gang and other gangs, and they were intermittently between using drugs or this extortion, whatever. So they had all the financial crimes and the murder and the keeping people in line. So tell us a little bit. Obviously, you knew about him a long time before you were tasked to try to bring him in, I'm guessing. So why don't you give my audience a little primer on Whitey?
Yeah, so, I had covered leads on Whitey sightings in Connecticut. I was in Connecticut for 10 years, and I was assigned a fugitive task force down there, primarily for my entire time. So I got good at hunting people from my time in Connecticut. And the reason why I got assigned to the Bulger case was because people in Boston or in New Haven had transferred up to Boston, and they knew my reputation and they knew the task force. what we had done. And that's why I got selected to run that case. But Whitey Bulger was he ran the Winter Hill Gang, but he primarily, operated in South Boston and the Rotary Variety Store and multiple other locations where he would conduct criminal activities. And he was from South Boston. His brother Billy was the Senate president for Massachusetts and the UMass, college system president after his time in the Senate. He was one of the most powerful Democrats in Massachusetts, and everybody owed him favors. And John Connolly, who was an FBI agent assigned originally to New York, caught a top 10 LCN figure down there and got transferred to Boston. He's from Southie, and he knew the Bulger family and knew Billy and Jimmy and the entire family. And that's the genesis of that relationship that formed up between John Connolly and Whitey Bulger. Whitey Bulger was, born in 1929. He was he was older when he fled, but, and certainly probably 81, 82 years old when we caught him. He ran a criminal organization in Boston, and he would regularly and routinely get tipped off from John Connolly and other law enforcement of pending investigations against him. And so he had law enforcement in his pocket, but yet he was able to freely conduct criminal activities, including extortion, narcotics trafficking, arms trafficking, murder, you name it. And he would extort anyone and everyone, including the Massachusetts lottery winner, who he stole his lottery ticket and cashed the ticket for himself.
Now,
and
you brought it up. I wanted to show you this. Only Whitey Bulger could get millions or whatever dollars from a lottery. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a lottery ticket. This is a losing lottery ticket, which I want to point that out. All right. And this criminal among criminals, I forgot that he stole it. But even that, to get one ticket, he didn't know it was, or did he know at that time it was the winner, or did he just steal what he done?
He knew it was a winner.
My God.
Yeah.
Okay, so keep going. This is our guy. It is a Whitey.
So, ultimately he was charged in 2 indictments. The first indictment was in 1995 for extortion, money laundering, narcotics trafficking by the FBI. And then he was subsequently indicted in year 2000 for RICO murder, 19 counts. When he was returned to Boston, they charged him with the RICO murder case, and they dismissed the 1995 indictment. So, rewinding back to 1995, he knew that he was feeling heat, and he had been traveling with his then girlfriend, Teresa Stanley, in and around the United States. He had traveled to Europe too, specifically the UK and Dublin and Paris, pre-fugitive. And then in 1995, he gets tipped off by John Connolly that there's a pending indictment for he and Stevie Fleming. Stevie Fleming stayed around. He didn't run. And quickly, the Massachusetts State Police and the DEA arrested Fleming. Bulger ran. And with Teresa originally, Teresa got homesick. He returns her home and grabs Catherine Gregg, and they proceed to go. And, they were down in Selden, New York, on Long Island with Kevin Weeks's aunt, Nadine Matos. They used the alias name Tom Baxter down there. Then he went down to Grand Isle, Louisiana. And then he ultimately fled, came back to New York, met Kevin, and then ultimately left, went out to Chicago, and then took a train out to LA.
Now, Kevin is Kevin Weeks, right?
Yes.
Who is another, he's mentioned a lot in the Wikipedia. So he was sort of a close associate. I mean, he had good associates, but he was a close associate.
Yeah, he was a leg breaker for Jimmy. And, basically, if you were to title his role, it would be the enforcer. He would collect money for him and tune people up, to in order to, cover those payments. And Kevin was an important tool to him, because after he ran, he would communicate with Kevin using third-party addresses so that we were always a step behind him. And that's how they communicated early. And then once he fled, and once he knew that people were turning on him, he broke contact with everyone except, in my mind, Billy and Catherine Gregg's twin sister, Margaret McCusker.
Now, I think I just want to, because you mentioned it, I do want to put this in here about Billy, that again, he, president of the Senate, and that Massachusetts, it's a big body and an important body. I mean, Rhode Island, we're kind of small. Delaware, a small place, but this is big time. And afterwards, chancellor, whatever they called him, of the university. And he, of course, went before Congress, and they're always trying to not necessarily think that he's doing something, but they're always going, politicians are crooked anyway. So they're looking at him, and he testifies, if I got this right, he testifies in Congress over something. Maybe it's crime, crime bills or investigation of crime. And he claims he hasn't spoken to his brother, into whatever period. And it comes up later, I guess, somehow, that there's at least 3 episodes or 3 instances. And so either FBI or the DOJ is going to charge him with perjury.
Yeah.
And the FBI, and everyone who worked on this is very excited. They think, we, not only just because he's a politician, but he's also a crook. And so I think, this needs to be, and they decide, the powers that be, and I'm, not going to know whether it's up to you, whether you even think it's straightforward or there was a fix in to let Billy Bulger go.
I do. I wrote about it, in the book, and I do believe that there were political influences at play. And here's why I believe it. Is the case had been investigated at Fort Billy for perjury and obstruction prior to me, getting to Boston. I came to Boston in 2006, and they had a case built, and they had presented the case both to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston, but also to the DOJ in Washington, D.C. And they provided a prosecutive opinion that we had a very good circumstantial case which could be tried, in which he could be indicted and tried in the court of law. And the reason for that, the reason why we did that, is to smoke Jimmy out, is to smoke him out and make him do something that maybe would be uncomfortable for him, because he was so loyal to Billy. They were so close. And us indicting Billy would have blown the top of his head off. And that's what we wanted. And so, at the time, the assigned prosecutor was, I didn't know it at the time, but he's the mayor of New Bedford now. And he needed Democratic, support in order to obtain that office. And the U.S. attorney at the time was Mike Sullivan from Holbrook, I believe. And he was the U.S. attorney, but he was also the acting ATF director. And he needed support from both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican. And Billy, at the time, still swung a big stick in Boston. And, it's my firm belief that, Mike Sullivan needed Billy's support in some way, shape, or form. That if he indicted him, there would have been certain parts of the Democratic Party that might not have been happy about that. And do I have anything to prove that? No, I don't. Did I have a very tough conversation with Mike Sullivan, both after he was U.S. attorney and when he was practicing, in private practice? Yes. And I wasn't happy about it. And he and I, got into an exchange, and, I provided my opinion, and, that's what I think happened. And they waited till the statute ran on charging him. The day the statute ran, they decided not to prosecute. And the fix was in. It just was. And it's a shame because our whole strategy was that. Like we were covering leads and lookalike sightings and doing the things that we should be doing to try and catch him. But that action on charging Billy, that would have created some kind of action by the Bulger family, specifically Jimmy Bulger. I truly believe it. Whether it be through a third party, it probably would have been through a third party, but we believed that it would shake him out. And when that bubble burst, we were, not defeated, but we had to reorient ourselves to find another strategy in order to keep the investigation going. It was a real gut punch. I'm here to tell you, it really was.
So that my audience and myself can keep a sort of a concept of a breadth of time. When we know when Whitey was born, but give us sort of like when he's getting into crime, an age, then when he ran, then when he was caught. What are those three epochs like time-wise?
I'll approximate it.
Yeah, sure.
But he was born in 1929. He started, if memory serves me correct, he started with petty crimes here in the city. He graduated in probably his 20s into bank robberies across the United States. And that landed him in multiple penitentiaries, including Alcatraz in Atlanta. And ultimately he did his time and returned to Boston and did a stint in the Air Force, which I believe he was dishonorably discharged. But he really committed, a lot of bank robberies in his early age. And then he came back to Boston and smartened up. He got smart in prison and he realized he's got to operate behind the scenes. And he really did learn his craft. And I'm not glamorizing him because I would never, but he had a high IQ and he used it for all the wrong reasons. And his brother Billy was a very smart man too. They were well read and they had high IQs, and you couldn't take that away from them. But Jimmy used it for all the wrong reasons and really had a temper, and that temper would lead him to commit violence and ultimately murder.
And he took it on the lam in 95.
Yep.
And you're flying back with him in 11 or 13, 11. Okay, so there's the period of the entire world, 95 to 2011, which is, 16 years, give or take, and where everybody's trying to hunt for him. So I want to drop in here. I told you about it earlier before we came on here. So I want to drop, and then we're going to go to the search. We're ready for the search.
Sure.
That to have an idea, we were talking in terms of extortion and, money laundering. Tell us about the murder that we talked about of a young woman.
Yeah, I just know that Jimmy was concerned with Stevie Flemmi and his relationship with Deborah Davis. And Debbie Davis was a beautiful young woman, and she was the girlfriend to Steve Flemmi, and Bulger really thought she was going to rat them out to the police. And I believe she had got arrested by the police, and they actually picked her up. And Jimmy just basically told Stevie she got to go. And he wound up strangling her and told Stevie to pull out her teeth and get rid of her her finger, just basically dismaim her and then bury her. And, and then Jimmy went to take a nap. It was that kind of thing where he got, and you could see it on the plane too, he would have fits of anger and then he would cycle out of it and just be real calm. And this was one of those times. He was ruthless and he would kill anyone that he thought was going to interfere with his criminal activity and or, go to the cops and become a rat, an informant. And
I believe it was this one where it was years before her body was found. So family didn't even know where she was. I mean, assuming something bad had happened to her, but you always think maybe she ran away and she's, going underground, but she was gone.
Yeah, they uncovered her remains.
So you say you come back. Is that when you sort of got into it seriously in 2006, where you came back to Boston? And how did you get on? Did it become a task force or just everybody's looking for Whitey?
Well, I'll set it up in a couple of different ways. Is there was a Bulger fugitive task force in place that had been formulated in right around 1997. Right around there. And it was before my time. I was in Connecticut at the time. And that task force was in place. It was the FBI. It was the Department of Corrections. It was some elements of the Massachusetts State Police, some elements of the DEA and Boston Police for a short time in the beginning. And then it would, agencies would flow in and flow out. But I arrived in 2006 and it was the FBI. We were in a separate off-site building in the Coast Guard building right on Boston Harbor. And it was put over there because the original, when the task force was formed, there were still elements in the Boston office that were connected with John Conley. And we wanted the fugitive investigation separate from the office because of the corruption by Conley and the corruption by John Morris of taking money from Bulger and Fleming and the whole crew, in exchange for information favorable so that they wouldn't get in trouble. So that's why it was moved off site, and we would keep all the files in this vault over in the Williams building. And that's where we operated out of. And, so when I came in 06, I just jumped in and I was assigned to it because I had been successful with chasing fugitives in Connecticut, and people that my bosses up here, they knew that. So they assigned me directly to that unit. And so, I jumped in, I read everything about the case. I started covering leads. I was interested because he had money in London. And he had money in Dublin in a safe deposit box. And he had a bank account in the alias name of Tom Baxter in Piccadilly Circus in London. And the contact name on the bank account was none other than Billy Bulger in South Boston. And so, we see, or that at the time, it was before my time, the Department of Justice seized all that money. And that's going to be, if it hasn't already, be returned to the United States and given any proceeds, any ill-gotten proceeds that Bulger earned or had hidden, including the $822,000 in the apartment, goes to the victims' families, and the 11 victims' families of which he was convicted of, per the court order from his conviction.
So again, this starts where we're talking about that it's 2006 and the plane ride. We'll talk about, we're going to get to that, which is fun. So is in 2011. So during these years, there was, and again, I can just look at, and you can pick out anything you kind of like here, that again, it went on to, people, you or others appearing on America's Most Wanted, that there was a show in Germany that was sort of a knockoff of America's Most Wanted. And it was all in German, so you were the guest, so you had to have a earbud in doing it into English. And so again, because of these bank accounts and that, I'm not, it's a spoiler in a sense, but that you eventually find out that he never left the country except Mexico as a fugitive.
Right.
He had visited these places, obviously set up these accounts in person or whatever, and had visited with his girlfriend to England or to London at least. But he said, no, I went to Mexico a couple of times, but I've never, but you guys were around, taking leads from around the world. And I love this. This is from Wikipedia, that he was on America's 10 most wanted fugitives list, and he was above Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
Now that's good company. I mean, that's, it's like the top 10 music, and you're about the Beatles. And that's pretty good. So how did you keep doing it? I mean, this was your you didn't then go off and do bank robberies and stuff, right? Once you started, this was it.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the task force was my main responsibility. I did run a gang squad right alongside it as well. But, for the Boston office, Bulger was a priority, and he needed to be caught. And so, we had slowly increased the reward for him. When I came in 2006, it was $1 million. And in 2010, we upped it to $2 million. And, at the time I didn't realize that I wanted $5 million for him, but by congressional statute, you can only pay up to $2 million for a domestic U.S. fugitive. Now, for bin Laden, he was a foreign national, so the State Department had more discretionary funding, so that the reward for him was $25 million.
Right.
And I wanted the same for Bulger, but I didn't get my way. But we got the highest amount we could, and ultimately we paid that reward. So
now he's crisscrossing. He mentioned a couple of the stops. He's crisscrossing the country, and one of his cool things. I mean, again, I'm not praising him either, but he like I said, smart guy, high IQ. He's not nowadays people. Again, this was in the 90s into the 2000s. He's doing IDs, fake licenses. He's picking dead people or this or that. He's figuring out and smarting. He's traveling with a woman. So people aren't, even though they probably knew he had someone, they look like a couple. He looked like, when he's 60s, he looks like my dad, he's going to the country club or going to, Taco Bell or something, and not taking the lettuce, but he's going to Taco Bell and having and he's just, and he's not living ostentatiously. And in fact, there's a scene in a picture in the book where if this is true, he's taking socks that don't fit and putting them over used milk bottles to stretch them. Now, just go to one of the dollar stores and get yourself the right. So, he's smart about that. Now, all this money is accumulating in various places. Let me ask, because I wasn't sure, like I said, gang squad, was the Winter Hill gang moving on without him, or they sort of dispersed when he left?
Yeah, it really came down to Bulger, Flemmy, Weeks, John Moderano in some respects, although John was a fugitive himself, and other peripheral, members of his crew. And once they were indicted, that everybody flipped. Everybody got charged. Kevin eventually did 6 years in jail. He cooperated with the government. He turned on Whitey. So did Steve Flemmy. So did John Moderano, and on John Connolly as well. And so, Bulger was on his own. The power base that they had was gone. It really was. It was, as soon as they were indicted and everybody, either flipped or fled, that was the end of it. And Bulger was on his own, and he knew that. He knew he couldn't, reach back to anybody here except for a trusted couple of people. And I believe it was Billy and Margaret Custer.
So his last stop, and again, I'm sort of truncating it in because I want, again, this just sounds like, beating a dead horse, but I want people to get the book. because the connections, that we almost got him and he slipped. Those stories, we'd have to read the book on air, and I'm not a good audio book reader, so we're not going to do that. You get the book, the almost, then it's like a movie, and but a real movie, and it's like you almost get him, and then there's some of the people who help you, neighbors who think they saw him and they were right, that they've been living here under the name of Gasco, and they're just they're normal, Sally and Billy or whatever their names they were using, and they would have dinner or maybe barbecues with the people downstairs and whatnot. And I do think the place they ended up was I just love this. You probably can tell me before I find it here. The living in they were living in the Princess Eugenia Suites.
Yes.
Which is obviously like a condo or like a hotel, not a hotel so much as apartments or something. But it wasn't. They weren't there for the night. They were staying.
So we decided right around after Billy Bulger was not indicted, we had to pivot ourselves. And I remember it vividly. We were in a conference room at Center Plaza in Boston, and I had the whole team, and I'm sitting, and it almost looked like a fishbowl. It was big glass windows that overlooked, a bunch of desks. And so we're in the room, and I just said, I think that we need to refocus and stop targeting him and target her. And so everybody agreed it's a good idea. I think we should re-examine anything and everything we've done to investigate her. Because, keep in mind that she was wanted on a unlawful flight warrant as well. The reward for her was $150,000 for harboring. And so the investigative team went out and they hunted down these digitally enhanced photos, which we really never had great photos of her or Jimmy for that matter. And so they hunted down through a dentist these photos, which were back during those times, it was unheard of to do those really, really clear digital photos with the teeth and the facial structure. And so we were able to get our hands on those. And so the first step that we took was to target the American dental associations throughout any of the member agencies throughout the country and even into Canada, because he had connections to Canada as well. And so we started with the ADA, and then we went over to the plastic surgery associations, and we wound up getting a lead up in Victoria, Canada, which is outside of Vancouver in Western Canada. Beautiful place. And there was a dentist that had some records, and he was like, feel free to go through, there was some kind of lead that she might have been in that office. And, we had sent up these flyers, have you seen this person kind of stuff. And we just distributed it by email distribution all over the country. And we received a lot of leads, but, the one in Canada turned out to be a dead end, and most of them did, but it got us to rethink our strategy on focusing on her. And we didn't shelve him, but we were putting all our efforts into her. And then the next step, which I could talk about, as a follow on, is the next step was, what can we do next? What kind of publicity can we generate using this? And so again, we were in the same room, and I'm like, we've used America's Most Wanted. We've used, the old Unsolved Mysteries. We've used USA Today. We've done all the magazines, Soldier of Fortune magazine, all the historical magazines, based on his habits. So we refocused on her habits. So we came up with the idea of making our own public service announcement created by the FBI. And it was the first time it had ever been done. And I secured a $50,000 budget from Washington, D.C. They were like, what are you doing? You're making a commercial? And we used a production company up in Maine. And we used the public affairs female voice, which she had a voice for radio. And we created a 30-second announcement. Have you seen these people?
This is an announcement by the FBI. Have you seen this woman? The FBI is offering $100,000 for tips leading to Catherine Greig's whereabouts. These photos are from the early 1990s. Greig has had plastic surgeries. She is wanted for harboring James Whitey Bulger, a fugitive on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. 60-year-old Greig is the girlfriend of 81-year-old Bulger. He has a violent temper and is charged with 19 murders. Call the tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI.
Jimmy Bulger's wanted, Catherine Greig's wanted. Here, they're known aliases. Call 1-800-FBI. And it was very simple, but we targeted 14 media markets in places that we had leads on him, but we couldn't afford like the big LA markets and the big Chicago markets. So we had to focus on the smaller markets to take that 50,000 and spread it out. And so, lo and behold, we did, and it aired on June 20th, 2011. We had a command center set up at Center Plaza. All the leads would be dispersed to West Virginia, where it was the clearinghouse for the phones for the tips, and then they would be sent out to the field offices. So June 20th, it airs, and all of a sudden, the public affairs officer comes to me and says, "Rich, my phone is blowing up. I'm getting calls from CNN, BBC. They want you to appear on it," because it was the first time that the FBI had made its own commercial. And the national news markets, we didn't anticipate this now. The national news markets hopped on it, like innovative. The FBI, this is cutting edge stuff. And so I went on BBC and CNN, and it was the CNN piece that got the tip.
We feel as a task force and as an agency that it's a good time to focus on her and really, really target the audience, the daytime audience that will give us those tips and leads and really specific tips on her, which will connect to him.
Because CNN went global and the tip was seen by somebody in another country. And the tipster called it in on June 22nd. And it went through West Virginia, went to LA, came to us. I read it the morning of the 22nd, that the command center was working on public source database checks for Charlie and Carol. We couldn't come up with anything. And so I called my friend Scott Garriola, who was the agent who put the handcuffs on Whitey. And I called him and I said, "Scott, you got to cover this for me. You got to do this. I'm on vacation. I'm on vacation, and you got to do this for me. You have to do this for me." And so he reluctantly did it, called his guys, and it couldn't have been scripted better. He uses the apartment manager to call Whitey and Catherine and basically said, "Hey, your storage locker has been broken into. There's some things that, we need you to come down here and account for some things. And we're going to call the police." He comes right down and he's dressed in all white hat, white shirt, white pants. And Scott's got he comes down on an elevator to an underground parking garage. And he comes out of the elevator and Scott's got his gun right on him. And he's like, "Freeze, get down on the ground, get down on the ground. Are you Whitey Bulger?" And he says, "Fuck you, I'm not getting down on the ground." And the reason why he wouldn't is because there was oil grease on the floor. And so it was a back and forth. It was F you back and forth between Scott and Whitey. And Scott just wanted him to provide his identity. So finally he capitulated and said, I'm Jim Bulger. And he was compliant. He knew he had been had. And, he compliantly was handcuffed. He wasn't in any trouble after the initial verbal exchange. They brought him up. He showed them where the guns were. He showed them where the money was, showed them where the ammo was, the ammunition under the bed. They, Catherine Gregg was compliant. But, we always, you always go back and think, what could have happened? What if he didn't come down? What if he said, I'm not coming down there, and they had to go up and get him? Well, it could have been a hostage situation with Cat. He could have used Catherine as a hostage. He could have barricaded himself and shot his way, to the end, but he chose not to. And it couldn't have been scripted better, and it couldn't have happened in a better way for an agency that had been beaten by the press and by other law enforcement agencies for years, because we were all corrupt and we were all, trying to hide him. And to not have scripted better.
That is just, I'm just mesmerized by the story. I mean, I've read it, but when you listen to it, that this is really at the end of this 5-6 year thing, that the tip and the way that the commercial and the rest of it came to be. How were you tapped? Was it your position at that point? You weren't in California, so you went to California to shepherd him back. Was that just normal, standard operating procedure for you to be the guy?
Well, it was going to be me and another guy, and I had been on the case for a long time, and my partner Phil was a really good investigator, and he had been assigned to Cleveland, but I brought him back for a temporary duty assignment to work Bulger. And we had another TDY agent from New York, and they did great work. But what happened with that is I received the confirmation that Bulger was in custody from Scott via text, and I was home, and I was with my kids, and I think we were having dinner. It was around 7:00, and I get a text from Scott, and he's like, "Looking good." And I text back, "What? It's looking good." And he didn't hit me back. And then all of a sudden I get another text, and it says, "Bulger in custody, stand by for Catherine." And I took my phone and whoosh, threw it right across the floor, jumped up in the air. My kids thought I was nuts. And I was just elated. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I couldn't believe it, couldn't process it. And, so it's funny because, this is a good story, and it's in the book, but a couple days prior to doing the PSA, the public service announcement, I had called a prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office. His name was James, and, he and I had a good relationship, but he was always kind of, for lack of a better term, Debbie Downer on all the things we were trying to do. And so I told him about the PSA. He's like, "Rich, that is not going to work. That's not going to work. You guys have done all this stuff with the media. It doesn't work." I said, "All right, okay." And so when we caught him, I called him up that night, and I'm like, "James, you know what? I'm thrilled to be making this phone call right now. Bulger is in custody because of that public service announcement." Silence. Nothing. And I said, "I gotcha." And words to that effect. And he's like, "I can't believe it. This is unbelievable." And, my co-author, Bob, I didn't get out to California the night he was captured. I couldn't get an aircraft. I couldn't get a government aircraft to take me out there that night. And the government aircraft that I wanted to use was a Gulfstream 5, and that was in the Middle East at the time. And so I had to take commercial out the very next morning. We took a 7 a.m. flight out of Boston to LAX direct. And it was myself, Phil Torsney, and Neil Sullivan from the Marshals Service. And so we flew out, and, we got to his initial appearance in federal court in LA. And I met Bulger prior to the initial appearance, and he looked very different than the guy I had been chasing. He looked older, and he looked beaten in a jail cell, in the heart of, the federal building in LA. And Catherine did too. They looked tired. But he was respectful to me, and he wanted to cooperate. He said he would cooperate, to give consideration for Catherine, and ultimately he wanted consideration for John Connolly at the time. And that's another story, because not a lot of people know this, but it is in the book. At the time, the FBI you didn't have to tell an informant he was an informant. As long as you didn't pay him, you could receive information from he or she, and you didn't have to tell them that they had a paper file in an FBI office that's attributed to them. And so Bulger didn't know he had a file, and because they never paid him. If you pay an informant, you have to document it, and you have to have them sign in a code name, and then you have to document their real name. And Connolly wasn't going to do that. And so Bulger only learned he was a papered FBI informant after he got back from being captured and before trial. So between 2011 and 2013, he finds out that he is in fact a papered FBI informant, and he flips out. And on his flight home, he wanted consideration for Connolly. So he thought he had been wrongly convicted. Changes his tune once he learns that Connolly kind of duped him and had a very thick informant file attributed to Jim Bulger. And it provided Connolly with more status quo as an FBI agent, because he had top echelon informants with James Whitey Bulger and Stephen Fleming. And so, he changed his tune after he learned that Connolly was actually attributing information to him in a source file. And because Bulger was of the mindset that he was paying for information for him, he was paying Connolly and Morris for them to give him information. You see what I mean? So John Connolly did 10 years in federal prison for a federal charge for perjury and obstruction. And then he was charged in Florida with second-degree murder with a firearm because of the murder of John Callahan. John Callahan was an associate of Bulger, and apparently Callahan was either skimming money or doing something, and Bulger wanted him out of the way, and Connolly kind of helped him with that. And that's why the state of Florida was able to link Connolly to that murder, is because he didn't pull a trigger, but he let Bulger know, and Martorano went down there and killed him at Bulger's direction. And so, he was associated with that crime, and that's how he was convicted. And so, yes, there were lives at stake, and there were lives taken because John Connolly was providing him information, and he was using it to commit murder. And it's just incredible how those guys get compromised. It's just incredible. And there was a state police, detective that was compromised as well, and Boston police to a certain extent, but he had cops in his pocket. He just had, it was leverage for him.
Now you get on a plane, this lovely Gulfstream, and you get on with, and I remember, I don't get into jets. I get into small planes or big aircraft, but, you had, Catherine was with you, and she sort of stayed sort of in the front. She didn't participate in the interview so obviously I'm guessing he's Mirandized and all this and is willing to speak openly. Now, do you have a stenographer just taking notes, or was it recorded?
No, it was neither. So at the time, probably about a year prior to his capture, we had gotten approval to use that we could record interviews. We could never record interviews prior to the Department of Justice allowing us to use video audio equipment. So I didn't have time to get an audio recorder because it was just such a fast pace, and we had to get them back, in a certain time period. And so, I go back, hypothetically speaking. So I'll set it up for you.
Mm-hmm.
Is he comes onto the aircraft. It's really hot day. It's humid in LA. We're at a commercial aviation hangar. at LAX. He arrives with the Marshal Service in the van. He's got the jumpsuit on. He's belly chained, leg ironed, and handcuffed. And he's, so the plane probably seats maybe 14 comfortably. And it's really beautiful leather seating. It's very comfortable. It's very VIP like. And I wanted it because I had flown on that aircraft prior, and I knew I knew that aircraft very well. I had spent a lot of time on it in another assignment prior to the Bulger case. And so, strategically, I set him to my left, on the left side of the aircraft. I sat on the right, facing forward, the cockpit's up front, and then there were seats that point toward the rear of the aircraft. Neil Sullivan was there, and Phil Torsney was directly across from Bulger. The seats were able to swing. You could lever them, and so I swung so that I could look at him. And first of all, he waived his rights to an attorney. He wanted to speak on it, without being Mirandized. He waived his rights right away. So we were everything was fair game. Every question was fair game, everything. So really what we wanted to do is we wanted to not focus on the murders he had conducted, because that case had already been built. He was going to go to trial for that. And I wasn't interested in that. And what I was interested in, how he'd remained a fugitive for so long, who may have helped him, and why. And so the line of questioning was based on that. And so, but he was tough, okay, because think about it, as an investigator, he spoke for 6 hours unimpeded, no bathroom break, no water break, no food break. And if you broke contact with him, he would call you out on it every time. He called Phil out once, he called Neil out once. I learned from that, and I stayed right on him, and I wouldn't look away. I wouldn't do anything. And so Phil and I we were asking the questions. Catherine was up front toward where the pilots were. And then we had a medic on the plane just in case, because he had a heart condition. And so we had an LA medic fly to Boston with us, because, imagine he dies on the airplane. It would have been the worst. So we had tried to think of every contingency, and that was one of them. But there were things that he would talk about, and there were things that he would not talk about. Anybody that was alive, like if I asked a question about Kevin Weeks, he would say, "Go talk to Kevin about it. I'm not going to answer." If I asked about Catherine, "Go talk to her about it." And he wouldn't talk about people that were alive. But anybody that had died, he would talk about. And, so, we asked him such questions like, where did you go? Tell us where you went when you fled in 1995. And he laid it out for us, to some extent. But then when we got to some of the hard questions, like, who helped you remain on the run? I'm not going to answer that. I knew we had money in Paris. I knew it. And it had been in the investigation for a long time that he had squirreled money away in Paris. So I asked him about it. He's like, "Yeah, I'm not going to answer that." And so I'll give you an example of why he didn't answer it. Is a month after he was captured, I'm listening to phone calls of Jimmy and Billy at Plymouth County Correctional Center. Jail calls, they're all recorded. So I'm listening, and Billy, about a month after the capture, he says, "Hey, I'm taking a Catholic Charities trip to Spain. I'm going to be gone for a couple weeks." And so I track his travel, and he goes to Spain, and then he returns and he goes through Paris, and then he comes home to Boston. And so, as an investigator, what do you think I'm leading to? Is that Billy was probably on the contact card for the bank account, and he retrieved the money. And the other part of it is, and I think that's our only regret with the capture of him is I don't think we got all the money. I really don't. And I think that if Bulger was ever heated up in Santa Monica, he was smart enough where he would have had money elsewhere, out west, because he was always driving to the casinos to wash his old money to create new money so that he didn't raise suspicion. Because all that money that was recovered in the walls, that was all $100 bills, 1995 $100 bills. He was getting nervous because of the age of the money. And so he would take incremental amounts of money, go out to the casinos and buy chips, play a couple games, turn it in, get new cash. And that's what he would pay his rent with. And they paid in cash. And so it was a rent controlled apartment. Everybody knew him as Charlie and Carol. But it's a fascinating thing. It was a fascinating plane ride. It was the single most important interview I've ever done in my life. And it was truly a case study in human behavior. Any psychologist would be, frothing at the mouth to be on that plane, because he really was a case study in human behavior. Very controlling, narcissistic, manipulative. His whole thing was to control that conversation. And he would deviate into his childhood, and he would deviate into his life of crime. And we would always have to reel him back in order to keep him focused on what we wanted him to answer. And sometimes he just wouldn't even listen to us and would just go off. And, he cried during the flight, and then he got pissed during the flight. And very racist guy, Jim. Very racist. And he displayed that, on the flight, and, utilized the N-word more times than I care for. And, and he would get angry about it. His whole demeanor would change when he got angry. And there were times where he would just shut me down and he would just say, what the F am I doing here? I shouldn't be talking to you guys. I shouldn't be giving you my playbook. And because you arrested my brother Jackie. And I'm like, he got himself involved with you. What were we going to do about it? And, he would circle back. But
now, you may have mentioned it, but I missed it. So there was or was not any recording? You just got the information?
There was no recording. I could have recorded it, but I'm so glad that I didn't. And here's why. Is because if we had recorded it and let me just rewind for a second. Mm-hmm. What we did is we took notes. Okay. And copious notes, and formulated a written report called an FD 302, which is a statement of facts during an interview or an interrogation. It's based on facts only. If we had recorded that audio video, I would have brought that back to Boston. I would have had to have provided a copy to my boss right away. I would have had to provide multiple copies to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And ultimately, when he was tried in 2013, copies would have went to the defense.
Yep.
Now, there were so many media leaks that were coming out of the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Marshal Service that if we had done that recording would have made it to the press before I even hit play. And so I'm so glad that we didn't do it, because it would have been a nightmare. And I and anybody that was with me on that aircraft would have been blamed for it. And so hindsight's 2020, and I am extremely happy about hindsight being 2020, because I'm so glad we didn't record it.
Well, I'm glad you had to rush on the plane. You didn't get to go to Radio Shack and get yourself a little mini recorder and that stuff. That's good. Now, we've got so much of a story that the sort of the bookends of them are in the news, that he's of course brought back. He is tried and convicted and sent to prison for quite a long time. What did and we'll talk about the end of that as well. But what happened to Catherine? How much did she get?
She so we indicted her for harboring, and we indicted her and for harboring. She ultimately pled guilty, and she was given what to me is the longest federal sentence ever for a harboring charge. Now, the U.S. Attorney's Office typically doesn't like to do harboring cases because it's the whole argument of blood is thicker than water. It's familial. In this case, they were boyfriend, girlfriend. They weren't married. And so we charged her with harboring, and she would have been convicted even with a jury. The evidence was overwhelming. And a lawyer by the name of who's actually representing Lindsay Clancy in this trial.
Really?
Kevin Reddington is Catherine's lawyer, and she wound up pleading because Kevin realized the evidence was just overwhelming. We had surveillance video of her in a pharmacy getting medications for him. We had documentation from the apartment. We had fake IDs for her, and so she ultimately did 8 years. Well, once she finished the 8-year sentence,
8 years.
We with intention brought her back to the grand jury and wanted to question her about, finances and, what other monies that they were hiding. And she refused. And so she did another 21 months in jail and so you're willing to do 21 months in jail with the knowledge that you're going to get a payday at the end of it.
And is she still with us?
Yes. Yes, she is.
She's out there maybe having money, maybe people watching her to see if she's buying automobiles.
No, I tell you that once he was captured, that was the end. Of course. And there was no real, I think from an agency perspective, I think they were done with her, and she had done her time, and they weren't going to bother with her. Right. I wanted to follow her, but I was told not to. So
yes, go do something else. Now, again, wrapping up that again, he went to prison. I'm forgetting which prison it is, but when he gets there, he's not there too long. And why is that?
Well, so he went to prison. His first federal facility was Phoenix. And then he was moved to Florida. And then ultimately in 2018, he was moved to Hazleton, West Virginia. Now, Hazleton is one of the most violent prisons in the country. And that's even identified by the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Multiple murders happening there every year. So he was put in general population, which is absurd because, first of all, it had to be some kind, and this is just my opinion. I have no fact. This is just my opinion based off having previous cooperating witnesses that testified for the government go to these facilities, and we and the Marshal Service, who's in charge of running WITSEC and witness security program and placement of these individuals, you're supposed to do a threat assessment, and you're supposed to look at the entire population of the prison and find out if there's any, buddy that could target him or any enemies or any, we call them keep froms in the jails, people that are going to commit violence against each other. So he's put in general population. Within 6 hours, he was dead. And it was 2 Springfield mob guys that took, and they call it socks and locks, and they put metal locks in socks and they beat you to death with it. And that's what they did to him. And he had a lookout, and they went in the cell and beat him till they didn't even know who he was anymore. I think people were probably happy that happened. I was asked, how I felt. I really didn't feel much. I just felt like we were done. I was retired in 2017. I was just like, it's done. It's over, but I always thought, in the evolution of writing my book is I was, Bob Ward and I have a a mutual friend, and he is the director of security of the Garden Museum. His name's Anthony Amore. He's written several books. After the capture, he sent me a blank journal, and he sent me a personal note. He's like, "Hey, great job. Now write your story." And I didn't think anything of it at the time. I spoke with him. I said, "Thank you for this. I really appreciate it." He says, "Rich, you have to write a book. You have to." And I blew it off. I just didn't give it any mind. And then when I started reading books and I started seeing some books come out, and nobody was including, the central theme of my book, which was the plane ride. And everybody, it got lost in translation because that was the only interview that he ever did with law enforcement ever was on that aircraft. And I was filming something for another book, and the director, he bought my book while he's interviewing me. He's like, "Hey, I'm 150 pages in. I love this book." And like the flight was so cool. And so, once I approached Bob in like 2019, and it was just prior to COVID hitting, and we met at my house, and it was Anthony, Bob, and I, and it was a nice day on my back deck. And I'm like, I think I want to do this. I want to use the flight as the central theme and then work it out from there. And so Bob, interviewed me, and he deserves credit. He wrote the book. It's my story, but we were a combined editing team, but he wrote that writing is his, and it's really good writing. And to set it up for you is we had gotten disappointed when we wrote our first book proposal, which that's what you have to do. You have to write like a over the top strategic viewpoint of it and submit it to a publisher. We submitted it to a Seattle-based publishing agent, and she comes back and she's like, "This is terrible. This is not good writing." And it was our first crack at it. And, I'm a fact-based, because of my profession, I'm just a fact-based. I didn't know how to write in the abstract, to transport somebody to where you want them. And we had to self-learn that. And Bob really had to self-learn it. And he did it. He wrote it. His writing is fantastic. It really
Well,
is.
again, I don't try that when I get the co-author things, and sometimes it's got a bigger print or a smaller print, or it's by last name, alphabetical. And something, looking at this book, when I first contacted Bob to do it together, and we never seemed to work that out. And I thought, I don't mind. And Bob's got some other stories I want to, just his journalism stuff I wanted to. So I felt I wasn't pushing him aside. But when the co-things aren't two authors, two journalists, two lawyers, then you're like, well, people say, well, I give him a chapter and he makes notes, then I send him my chapter. So those are allowed when two authors write. I said, well, this is, as you said, it's your story, and this is just my guess, and you're vindicating me, is that you have the story and he massaged it into a book. Yeah, and no offense, ladies and gentlemen, once again, the book is Face to Face with Whitey Bulger by Rich Teahan and Bob Ward, and it's everything Rich just said it is, because and I with him 100%, the plane ride is fantastic. And what's also good about it, the book isn't, and I've done a couple of those recently, it seems to be the way to do it now, is not fully linear. So you have some airplane, then you have some background, then you have some airplane, then a little bit. Sometimes the airplane is follows into some chasing around the country. Sometimes it doesn't. It's just a blop of some of the airplane. Like I said, it lasted 6 hours. You got plenty of airplane. Yeah. So it's airplane, not other things, airplane. But the other parts that you don't go way back, and all of a sudden now you're talking about, when you were 4 years old. I've gotten those books too, and I said, no, that's too much. But this is just, it is perfectly laid out to do it exactly that if you did either linear, everyone's jumping to the end of the book. If you do it at the beginning, well, why do I care about the runner? No offense, running around the country. Okay, some of that story. I mean, I'm sorry, the PSA is hysterical, but the plane ride is your absolutely. I'm sure I'm not the first to tell you. Absolutely, that is the center of the story. Yes. And as you said, not just because it's interesting, and you got the. I can say it. We can say this on air because we're not commercial TV. All the fucks and the shits and the bastards and the bitches and the N-words, all that stuff is comes out of his mouth and is during this thing. And like you said, he's never done that before. It's not like you are one of many. And so, yes, everything about the way, thank God that you found Bob, or I'm sorry, what was this other guy's name?
Anthony Amore is a friend of ours.
Yeah. Yes. Mwah. Now you said other movies, other books. So you've done other books. I can look you up, and you've written other books.
There's gonna be something coming out on Hulu in 2027, based on Kesey Sherman's book called Hunting Whitey.
Got it. I've got that one too. I mean,
I was interviewed for that. That series will come out. It's narrated by Ben Affleck. It's gonna come out in 2027, but I filmed that, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, in a studio out in Brighton, and so, you know, how much of that they'll use, but I was interviewed for 4 hours, so.
It's a documentary, not a movie, right?
It's a 3-part
documentary, right? I mean, there's the whoever was in the movie. Who was in the movie? One of the Whitey movies.
Block Mass.
Yeah.
Johnny Depp.
Yeah. I'm saying, okay, fine. That's all right.
Yeah.
But I do like the documentary pieces, but if they're done well, and they're done with real people, and then occasionally because you get bored, you want some scenes where they use backs of actors and stuff like that, acting out things that are happening. It's not the people, but it's to give you a flavor, and then going back. And if it's well balanced, talking heads can get so boring, but you match the talking head with live action or clips. Or to speak of clips, is the original PSA and the CNN story, are they like on YouTube somewhere?
You should be able to find the PSA on YouTube. I don't know about the CNN story, but if you Google my name,
right, that's the Google and my YouTube. Yes, it's wonderful when you put that. You get all this stuff because I'd like to drop that in here somewhere because it's so good. Just that you haven't seen it, but just the idea. Hi, ladies and gentlemen, we're looking for this woman. She is with this guy who's a murderer. I'm making this up, but it's like, I'm sure some people made fun of it or satirized it by saying, what do you do? Hi. Like, I'm selling toothpaste. No, I want you to find this criminal.
Yeah, and it's funny because it was really, their demise came from a stray cat. The tipster and Catherine Gregg struck up a friendship out in front of Princess Eugenia over a stray cat. And they developed a friendship over that because Catherine was an animal lover, and they shared a connection. And that was their demise, was a homeless cat.
Well, and again, I'd have to see the story or even the PSA. Now, they weren't blood, but so they were cordial, and they lived in this building together, and the woman decides that's them. Now, she didn't have to say anything. They're not hurting her. Now, she might worry, gee, they probably got guns and bombs up there. Maybe I'll turn them in. Now, did she get any of the gazillions? Yeah.
Yes.
That's good.
Yep, we paid them down in Times Square in New York. About I think 1.3 million went to a overseas bank account, and the rest went to a U.S. bank account. And they rode off into the sunset.
Good for them.
Yep.
Now, when you said something about New York, you mean you did a presentation in Times Square or something?
I had to pay them in person, and I had a check, and I had to provide the check, and I had to have them sign a receipt that they received it.
Now, was this filmed or in?
No. Oh no.
Okay.
Oh no. This is.
I'd love to see that too. It's like, the Publishers Clearinghouse. Look what I won for turning in. Oh, that's
this was in a WeWork office in Times Square, and and it was you know, it was just kind of a weird place to do it. But they, you know, they were coming in from overseas, and they came into probably LaGuardia or one of JFK or whatever, and so we met in Times Square, and that was it.
Now, I'm sorry. So I'm just keeping it straight. So they were, you said they're coming in for Europe, but these were the people in California lived in the Princess Place, or were they somebody else?
So the person that was the tipster didn't live in the building. They lived across the street.
Oh, all right.
But they developed this friendship over this cat.
Over the cat.
And so this tipster got to know Catherine.
Right.
And then saw the CNN piece, and that was it. It was very specific information too, like Charlie and Carol Gasco, you know, stray cat.
Yep.
103rd Street, apartment 303.
Apartment, second floor, 3 to the left.
Yeah.
And again, there's a picture in the book. I'm going to leave this, and I'm going to let you wrap up with anything you'd like to. The picture in the book of the apartment. And of course, you've got other pictures there. There's like, you know, the guns and all that. And there's stuff, and like I said, the money behind the wall and this and that. Then it's the mannequin with the baseball cap or whatever. I'm assuming he's got that in the window, except somebody tries to pick him off. It warns him. And so he goes, all right, somebody's trying to get me this week. So it's sort of a decoy. It's not like it's really there for a reason, except let me have someone shoot that. Then I know someone's after me. People would say, well, stay away from the window. And he might say, well, I'm going to stay away from the window, but I'm putting this out there to tempt someone thinking they're going to shoot me. And then, of course, I'll open up with my AR or whatever and blow them away. What a guy. So again, I'm wrapping up a wonderful hour here with Rich Teahan on his book, Face to Face with Whitey Bulger, which again is all about an airplane ride, ladies and gentlemen, an airplane ride. So anything you'd like to send out to my guys and gals here from you?
No, I just appreciate being on, and I hope you like my book. I'm a little biased because I think it's a good read, but I've gotten great feedback, and I hope that your audience, likes it as well.
Great. And I will share any feedback that I get directly, indirectly, or otherwise. So ladies and gentlemen, to wrap up, I want to thank once again Rich Teahan for appearing today on Murder Most Foul. Say thank you, Rich.
Thank you.